$1 trillion sell-off.
Front and center this hour, the deep sell-off.
A major tech sell-off today.
DeepSeek sell-off is still really pressuring tech.
Triggered on its face by one Chinese startup.
Let's talk about DeepSeek because it is mind-blowing and it is shaking this entire industry to its core.
But underneath, stemming from growing fears around a technique that could upend the AI leaderboard.
A technique called distillation.
Distillation.
Their work is being distilled.
Yeah.
Distillation is the idea that a small team with virtually no resources can make an advanced model by essentially extracting knowledge from a larger one. DeepSeek didn't invent distillation, but it woke up the AI world to its disruptive potential. I'm Deirdre Boza with the Tech Check Take, AI's distillation problem. AI models are more accessible than ever. That is the upshot from a technique in AI development that has broken into the main narrative called distillation. Geoffrey Hinton, dubbed the godfather of AI, he was the first to coin the term in a 2015 paper while working as an engineer at Google, writing that distillation was a way to transfer the knowledge from a large, cumbersome model to a small model that's more suitable for deployment. Fast forward to today, and upstarts, they're using this method to challenge industry giants with years of experience and billions in funding. Put simply, here's how it works. A leading tech company invests years and millions of dollars developing a top-tier AI model from scratch. They feed it massive amounts of data, harness huge amounts of compute, and fine-tune it into one of the most advanced models on the market. Then, a smaller team swoops in. Instead of starting from scratch, they train a smaller model by using a technique called knowledge distillation, pummeling a larger model with questions and using that to train its own smaller, more specialized model. By capturing the advanced model's reasoning and responses, they create a model that's nearly as capable, but...
So they've sort of discussed this before. Sounds like maybe they're kind of going into some of the concepts behind how this works, but we previously had a discussion on DeepSeek, and they were highlighting some of the interesting things that it was doing. I think they even highlighted the fact that if you asked DeepSeek what it was, it would say that it was basically ChatGPT, and so that made it very suspicious as to how it got its information, which obviously would be weird if you trained a model to tell its users that it was something it wasn't, unless it came from some amount of knowledge distillation that occurred.
Much faster, more efficient, and far less resource intensive.
This distillation technique is just so extremely powerful and so extremely cheap, and it's just available to anyone. Anyone can basically do it, that we're going to see so much innovation in this space on the LLM layer, and we're going to see so much competition for the LLMs. So that's what's going to happen in this new era that we're entering.
Tech giants use the technique too. In fact, Google was a pioneer in distillation, thanks to Hinton's research. Just weeks before DeepSeek broke onto the scene, Google was already using distillation to optimize lightweight versions of its Gemini models. Once again, Google had the tech, but someone else, DeepSeek this time, turned it into the story. Just like Google pioneered transformers that made generative AI possible, only for OpenAI to swoop in with ChatGPT and own the narrative. DeepSeek showed Wall Street just how effective distillation could be.
People talk a lot about DeepSeek and these new models that seem to be doing the work that was done in years before or months before in days. People need to remember what's happening is they're distilling, which basically means building, on the frontier models that have been created.
Able to mimic and even surpass OpenAI's advancements in just 2 months, spending what it says was less than $6 million on the final training phase. But it's too simplistic to attribute its success to just copying.
It became increasingly clear that they had made some fundamental improvements in the way to approach this.
DeepSeek also applied clever innovations.
If distillation was the only reason China got these models, like DeepSeek got these models, then Microsoft should have also gotten them, right? Like there's something more to it. And it's not just compute, it's not just distillation, it's not just access to like a lot of tokens. It's about cleverness.
Yet distillation was a major factor in DeepSeek's rapid ascent, helping it scale more efficiently and paving the way for other less capitalized startups and research labs to compete at the cutting edge faster than ever before.
There were these researchers at Berkeley just a week ago showed that for $450, they could create models that were almost as smart as this reasoning model from OpenAI called O1 for $450. That's not $450,000.
That's pretty cheap. But again, this is the benefit of being able to look at something that already exists and then building on top of it, which is you're going to be able to take so many shortcuts as that encompasses it. Though $450, I would highly suspect these individuals are just referencing maybe like the time for compute or something along those lines, maybe even electricity. I would have to look into this more to say for sure. Obviously, researchers themselves probably make enough that this could be like an hour or two for a researcher to get paid. So I'm sure when DeepSeek referenced their like 5 to 6 million budget, that likely included employees, etc., in that process, and presumably improvements that they made on top of that model that they were able to generate. This 450, my guess would have to be basically excluding most other extraneous costs that would actually be necessary to make it possible, like maybe the person's time, coordination, the real estate. It goes on and on. There's no way $450 in most cases is going to work. That's like a few hours of work for most people in the space, not including the acquisition of equipment or hardware or anything along those lines.
So there's $450 they could do that. So this distillation really works.
That new reasoning model called Sky T1, made by distilling leading models in just 19 hours with $450 and just 8 NVIDIA H100 chips.
There's a little small detail in the technical report in the research paper by the DeepSeek folks. They actually took an existing model, it's called Quen. This is not a reasoning model, it's an older model by Alibaba. And they said, hey, can we make that smarter so that it can do reason? One approach they had was to do this kind of reinforcement learning, this kind of fancy technique. They did that, and it was much better. Quen got much better. But they also just tried distilling it. So they just took 800,000 outputs from R1, and then they just did very basic tuning, very cheap, simple tuning. And that actually beat all of the other approaches.
Just weeks later, researchers at Stanford and the University of Washington created their S1 reasoning model in just 26 minutes, using less than $50 in compute credits. And Hugging Face, a startup that hosts a platform for open source AI models, recreating OpenAI's newest and flashiest feature, deep research, just for fun, hosting an in-house 24-hour challenge that resulted in an open source AI research agent called Open Deep Research. Which begs the question, why are big tech firms still investing billions of dollars to push the frontier, developing the most advanced AI models, when someone can just turn around and distill it for significantly less work and less?
I think that's a reasonable question, but somebody has to do it at the end of the day. I think it's reasonable to say, like, why are the people who are choosing to make the investment to be the first to do it, doing it? But also, they're the ones who had to figure it out the first time, and that's where the challenge comes in. And so everybody who follows is going to have an easier and easier time to enter it. And this is where somebody has to do it. I would say, at least from a purely engineering standpoint, it's work that will eventually get done and should get done. And so the alternative is nobody pays up front for us to have advancements, and then we all just stagnate, which is not how it's going to work. Engineers are going to keep pushing the limits. Companies are going to keep pushing the limits. And so eventually things will improve. But I think it's a good point where if you are not currently the leader in one of these spaces, if you're not like, or have a lot of cash, so like OpenAI or Google, for instance, or maybe Meta, you should be asking yourself, why are you making novel models at all? Especially in an LLM case. So this is one of those scenarios where most of the questions that they're asking are standard things humans would ask about, and they would have access to online. Like you could potentially Google and find this answer. And so the AI is really kind of facilitating that search and interpretation of the data that exists already at your fingertips. And so since a lot of that is like publicly available, it's going to be easier for other folks to compete in this area. I do think it's going to be much harder for folks to compete in areas that are not publicly available, because then that's going to be harder to find. Likely those models are not going to be available to the public, because if the information that is used for them or the questions that they're going to answer aren't available to the public, then how would somebody try to distill it from a model from another company? And so this is exactly where their problem comes in, which is OpenAI made their model available for others to use, and then therefore they were able to distill that knowledge and then be able to catch up very quickly for a comparable model or something that was way cheaper that can do something very useful or very similar to what ChatGPT originally did.
Less money.
Now, Microsoft and OpenAI are investigating whether their new Chinese competitor used the OpenAI model to train its rival chatbot, including unauthorized access to OpenAI developer tools. Also, David Sachs, Trump's AI and crypto czar, said on Fox yesterday, there's, quote, substantial evidence DeepSeek, quote, distilled knowledge from OpenAI models to create its own products.
If model distillation.
So I'm not sure about the dev tools thing. That seems weird, but who knows what actually happened. I don't think that Microsoft or ChatGPT or OpenAI has any real claim on anybody distilling their information, because they are already in legal battles with other folks who they stole the information from originally, like media outlets, newspapers. There's so many things, and it goes on, where they clearly just scraped the internet, whether or not they were allowed to do so or not, and then they're actually sharing that information out. And so clearly they used things that other people had that was copyright infringement to some extent, and then they just trained on that data anyway, and basically we're hoping nobody was going to be able to figure it out. And here, another company is using the information that they have already stolen to then train their own model. And so I don't think they're going to have a easy time being able to justify how their data is proprietary unless they share what that data was in order to train it. And then that would likely show that they took it from other sources that they might not have been able to do. And so I don't think they're going to have any stance for any actual ramifications for this.
Is accelerating, which these recent developments show is happening, and any small team can leap ahead of the biggest AI companies. What's happening to their competitive edge? Another key paradigm shift post-DeepSeek, the rise of a new open source order, a belief that transparency and accessibility drive innovation faster than closed-door research.
My joke is everybody's model is open source, they just don't know it yet, because it's so easy to distill them. So you might think you haven't open sourced your model, but you actually have.
DeepSeek open sourced its V3 and R1 models, publishing essentially a blueprint that allows anyone to download, use, and modify it for free. Likewise, those models published by university researchers and Hugging Face, they were all open source too, raising questions about OpenAI's closed source strategy that once seemed like a moat, but suddenly looked more like a target.
Open source always wins. Like in tech industry, that has been like one truth, of the last, 3 decades, is that you cannot beat the momentum.
Even OpenAI CEO Sam Altman himself walked back his closed source strategy. In response to a question on Reddit whether OpenAI would release model weights and publish research, Altman replied, "Personally, I think we have been on the wrong side of history here and need to figure out a different."
Yeah, this is really, we had hoped to be able to have our lead for much longer. And now that people are starting to catch up faster than we anticipated, we're going to play nice and share what we have, considering other people already have access to it. So the only options really now are either they intentionally try to share or somebody's going to share it on their behalf, basically, in the near future. So this more seems like their hand has been forced, more so than them being generous or nice with some of the development that they have done in the past.
Open source strategy. Just a remarkable statement from a leader who has long championed the closed source approach, citing safety, competitive dynamics, and monetization as key justifications. For Altman to now admit that OpenAI may have been on the wrong side of history, that suggests mounting pressure and could have ripple effects across the AI landscape.
Yeah, totally agreed. Because some of those other things we just mentioned, like monetization, I think are key, which is OpenAI has to be able to justify why they have billions of dollars and why they spent billions of dollars. And so the best way to justify that is saying, well, we built something nobody else has, and so therefore their investors were paying into an advantage. And so right now they're losing that advantage very quickly. And so now they're changing their story because they need to figure out how do they describe what they're currently doing and how their business exists, especially in a space where so many people are going to start coming out of the woodwork to try to copy whatever they have.
Landscape. Distilled models, they can be created on the cheap, and without a valuation to protect, the universities and startups creating the models, they seem inclined to give it away for free. The biggest winners? Developers.
The open source keeps the proprietary players in check from a pricing and performance standpoint. Because if I know as a developer that I can always run an open source model on my own infrastructure, then that really reduces the pricing power of those proprietary players, which again is a huge win.
The cost of running AI applications is plunging. DeepSeek's R1, for example, costs $2.19 per million tokens. OpenAI's comparable O1 costs $60. So someone building an AI app would have to pay
Yeah, this is something that we also referenced in that previous video where it's just so much cheaper that it doesn't make any sense to use O1 when you could use R1. Like, it's literally like 30 times the price. And so there's no reason to do that. O1 is definitely not 30 times better than R1. And so I agree with the sentiment. I think this is going to add in competition and then it's going to drive prices down. And I think this is exactly why OpenAI and Sam were pushing for closed source, was because they know there's no justification for $60. The $60 is a justification for the amount of money that they spent. And so they spent as much money as they could to develop these models initially. And this is the price point that they thought was appropriate to basically reimburse them for that initial development that they had. And so it's not based off of how much it actually costs to run. It's basically including everything and their R&D. And so, which makes sense for a lot of companies. This is how companies work. But when other people can just immediately hopscotch into a very competitive model, then you're going to have to start seeing how much it actually costs for running that model and the execution of it. And that's going to drastically drop prices down.
multiples more to use OpenAI instead, which means the script has now flipped. Teams building AI applications, they used to be disparagingly called ChatGPT wrappers, accused of having no competitive edge since their entire AI app or website is just an interface on top of an OpenAI or Google or Anthropic model. But with the cost to serve steadily declining, those AI application makers, they now have an advantage.
Every time you make AI more efficient, you actually open up a dramatic increase in more use cases. I think if you zoom out and you say, if AI became 5x more efficient or 10x more efficient, I'd argue that we'll have 100x more use cases in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think this is a win for developers. I think it's a win for anybody building at the application layer of AI. And I think it's a win for the long-term AI ecosystem to have a continued sort of deflationary effect of the cost of these models.
And AI model builders who have been on top for the past few years, they're looking more and more commoditized. What Distillation has not done is change the calculus for the biggest players in AI. OpenAI is on track to raise $40 billion from SoftBank. Meta, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they all said on their first earnings report post DeepSeek that not only were their AI spending plans intact, but they would ramp up capital expenditures, or CapEx, even more. NVIDIA recovered from the DeepSeek sell-off, and Jevons paradox became the leading narrative.
There's plenty of people who are quoting Jevons paradox this morning, talking about the fact that an increase in efficiency for a particular resource leads to more use of that resource. Are you in that camp as well?
Absolutely. I believe fully that these new innovative techniques will lead to the development of more models, more testing, and will lead us towards AGI faster.
Smaller, more targeted models are optimized for speed and efficiency, making them cheaper to use, not just for developers, but also for enterprises integrating AI into their businesses. Here's Tuin Srivastava, founder of AI infrastructure company Base10.
What we are seeing from customers is that when it comes to using these models in production, oftentimes the smaller models are good enough. And now you're taking that really big power and using it in that smaller model.
He says he heard from nearly 24 Fortune 100 companies in the week following DeepSeek's reasoning model breakthrough. Not only do they want to run more efficient models, but it's changed their view on licensing AI. They're questioning the premium they pay for OpenAI's ChatGPT APIs in Azure and Anthropic's Claude in AWS. Which brings us to OpenAI. The pressure is on. And for Altman and his team, the holy grail is AGI, or artificial general intelligence. For them and the best capitalized players, you could call it an AGI at all cost strategy. The idea that they will continue to push the technological frontier relentlessly. And reaching it first is worth any investment, rather than relying on incremental improvements. $500 billion for Project Stargate, all part of Sam Altman and SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son's grand ambition to reach artificial superintelligence, AI that surpasses human intelligence in all aspects, including creativity and problem solving. Distillation may yield more cost-effective performance gains, but it does not drive the revolutionary breakthroughs needed to reach AGI or ASI. And that is why the race has never been more urgent. In a world where AI capabilities can be distilled, refined, and replicated faster than ever, the window to build a true frontier-level advantage is narrowing by the day.
It's a great point that I think she's making right now, which is likely due to the competition probably catching up much faster than they had anticipated. This is really going to force some of those AI-focused companies to push forward. Likely, OpenAI could have lingered where they are right now and try to kind of have their existing cost structure, maybe toss in a few more improvements or modifications, and then just sort of rested on their laurels until people caught up. And now that people are catching up faster and faster, it's going to push them to start running farther and farther ahead. And so they got to keep looking forward, because otherwise, looking backwards, they're likely going to lose at the price point that they're in. And so this is likely a good thing for the market and for AI in general and technology. So it seems like the rest of the segment is going to be an interview like they did in the previous AI segment. So I'm going to stop here. If you all are interested in me reacting to this interview like I did in the previous segment, please comment down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed what you've seen. I will see you around.